Hey everybody, this is Chris from Audio Technology Magazine, and I have music producer extraordinaire Joe Chiccarelli on the line, and I've just asked Joe to give us his 5-minute tour of his personal mixing space in LA. Joe, welcome, thanks.
Thanks, Christopher. Thanks for having me back. This is great.
So I'm just going to let you talk, but I think people will be fascinated by what you've got in the space, why you've got it, how you've got it plumbed in, as it were, and how you mostly access it and what you use it for. So over to you.
Okay. Well, we're here in the shack, which is a little house on the Sunset Sound lot here in Hollywood. And this is the room where I do all my overdubbing and in-the-box mixing. Traditionally, I go and track in the main rooms at Sunset Sound, which are great, beautiful-sounding tracking rooms with custom-built API-type desks. And then I bring things here. And I have a comfy little space here that I can do vocals, keyboards, guitars, in the box mixing. I have a Avid C24 control surface because I still love getting my hands on faders for balances and dynamics. To the right of the control surface, I have a rack, API rack, which has the Sunset Sound preamps. And these are sort of copies of the console in Studio One's preamp. This was designed by Frank DiMedio back in the 1970s, I think. And it's basically an API design, but there's Jensen op amps and Jensen transformers. So they're a bit more hi-fi, if you will, a bit fatter sounding than the traditional API. Still pretty aggressive, but just a little bit more size and tone. And through my radial workhorse, everything is chained together. So I have a Sunset Sound preamp and an API EQ and an API preamp here and an API EQ. Typically, my vocal will go in the Sunset preamp, or on the other side of the desk I have some Neve preamps, so I'll choose between those. My guitars tend to always go in the APIs because I like APIs for guitars. They're much more aggressive and gritty in the mid-range. I'm a fan of API EQs, especially again for guitar or keys or anything that I need bite for vocals. I tend to use more like the more tone control type EQs, like a Pultec. I have a Mercury Pultec here on the other side that I'll use. This is the patch bay. All my 32 channels of analog come up here and then go into a Burl summing network. The Burl summing network then goes out to my stereo bus chain, which is a Chandler Curve Bender, Shadow Hills compressor, and a Cush Clariphonic parallel EQ. And the stereo bus chain is pretty much in all the time. I don't monitor through it unless I'm doing a rough mix or a final mix, and I can switch between it on my dangerous monitoring here. I'm not sure if you can see that. Head for it up there.
Yep.
I do have analog VU meters if those are in the shot, and I do use those all the time. I grew up with analog tape, and I can really tell by the ballistics of a VU meter if I've got too much lower mid-range or too much low end, or they're always comforting to me, if you will. Here I have 2 channels of Neve preamps that I'll use sometimes for vocals or keyboards. They're great for fat sounding synth basses. I have a Moog Sub 37 that I use a lot for synth bass out in the other room. A Mercury Pultec that I tend to use again for synth bass, vocals, background vocals. An old 1176 that it's a Rev E and I love it a lot for guitars and lead vocals. My 1178 I'll use from time to time for guitars, for background vocals. They're a little different than 1176s, a little brighter. They're not the same transformers. Circuit's a little different. I also have a RTA here that I use for all my mixes. I always had an RTA on my mixes that I can use to sculpt the low end and just kind of, I'll know, I can judge my bottom end octaves. Yep. My control room's a bit shallow, so it's sometimes tricky, and I'll use that RTA to make sure my balance between my 60 and 120 or 30 and 60 is where it should be. Monitoring, I have ATC 45s, which I have another set that I use in the main rooms of Sunset, so I can have a constant reference here going back and forth. For my sort of NS10 type reference are Acoustic Energy AE1s, which I really, really love. They're just easy on the ear, fun to listen to, but they make me push the mid-range in a really great way. I'm able to kind of pull things out of the track without them being too forced and overly tweaked. And the Avitone Oratone copies, Space Echo, which gets used a lot. I love my lead vocals. A lot of times go through the Space Echo. Something about the distortion of those, when you overdrive the input, they can really put a lot of kind of sparkle and attitude in a vocal, so I love those. The ADL optical compressor I'll use for certain singers. The 1176 doesn't sound like the right choice. Shadow Hills and Cush Clariphonic are on the stereo bus. And if you can see below, there is the Oversteer modular channel, distressor, which everybody has. A few other API rack gear. The Clariphonic, the Curve Bender, the Chandler Curve Bender, an old Eventide H3000, which I love for special effects. Sometimes I'll use the Massenburg EQ in place of the Curve Bender or in place of the Clariphonic if I want a much more hi-fi or airy top end. Down the bottom of the rack, if you can see it, there's an old Orban Spring reverb, which is just great for fun analog reverb. So the Oversteer is a basically 2-channel mic preamp, EQ, compressor, saturation device, along with a almost Moog type ladder filter, very extreme filtering. So you can use the instrument input, which is what I tend to do often for synthesizers, or you can put a guitar or vocal through the preamp. It then goes into the filter, low pass, high pass, which, like I say, there's a resonance control, so you can really tweak them like you would a synthesizer filter. And especially for keyboards, it's an amazing tool because I really like to perhaps push the mid-range of the keyboard, but yet filter all the fizzy top end off of it and get it to sit in a nice place in the mix. So I use those filters a lot. The 3-band EQ is pretty typical and good sounding. There's a compressor that can get really aggressive with a fair amount of makeup if needed. The drive control is the key to the saturation, and there's 3 different types of saturation. You can see there that Jeff makes a separate box called the mass saturator, where he has different types of distortion. But the great thing about this channel is that you see those 3 knobs on the right-hand side of the box,
Yep.
that's basically your mixer. It's almost like you would mix three oscillators together in a synthesizer. You're mixing three different channels. You're mixing three different roots of the box together. One being the unaffected, one being the compressed and EQ'd, one being the distorted. So I can kind of blend in a little distortion, blend in a little compression, blend in a little EQ, blend in the dry signal, and it allows a lot of possibilities for guitar or keyboards. And I find like sculpting them in a track, it becomes so easy with this box. I have three big windows behind me of sunset, and that keeps me really sane. I've spent a lot of years in control rooms, and the days of the underground cave are gone. I like having natural sunlight. I find the day goes by faster. I don't feel tired, and I don't actually ever feel distracted by it, which is odd. I just feel like, I don't know, I'm more connected.
That's good. Thanks, Jay, for the tour of your room. Fascinating stuff.
Great. My pleasure.